Hi there, I'm Ivania. My parents, they sat there at that will reading, shoulders hunched, faces pale, while the rest of the family humiliated us, laughing, sneering, as if we were nothing. But they didn't know. They didn't know that behind their cruel words, behind every dismissive glance, a truth was waiting to explode. What happens when the invisible daughter inherits everything? What happens when the people who spent years erasing you suddenly realize they've lost? Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about money. It's a story about survival, betrayal, and the quiet power of standing back up. Aren't you curious how it all unfolds? I adjusted the collar of my coat as we pulled up to the Alaric mansion. The air was crisp, the kind of late autumn chill that worked its way into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. My parents, Orville and Lurleen, sat stiffly on either side of me in the back seat. My father's hand tapped nervously on his knee, a rhythm he probably didn't even notice, while my mother clutched her purse tightly in her lap, her lips pressed into a thin line. The driver opened the door, and we stepped out onto the circular driveway. The house loomed before us, all stone arches, towering windows, and ivy crawling up the old walls like it had been trying to swallow the place whole. I took a breath, steadying myself. We were here for the will reading, my grandfather's. A man who, despite his enormous wealth and legendary reputation, had always treated me like the afterthought, the youngest, the invisible one. Inside, the house was warm but cold at the same time. Polished wood floors, chandelier light bouncing off marble, the faint smell of expensive cologne hanging in the air. Voices echoed from the grand hall ahead, laughter sharp and bright like broken glass. As we approached, I caught sight of them all. My uncles and aunts, dressed to impress as usual. The cousins, Cressida, with her perfectly coiffed hair and a smile as sharp as a knife. Merrick, the smooth-talking lawyer cousin, with his expensive watch flashing under the lights. And Zephyr, the youngest of the cousins, already glued to his phone, no doubt live posting every moment. "Ah, the Marietta branch has arrived," Cressida drawled, turning to face us, her eyes raking over my parents' modest clothes with thinly veiled amusement. "Did you get lost on the way here, Orville? I hear small-town folks don't do well with city streets." I saw my father wince slightly, his mouth opening, then closing. My mother gave a tight, polite smile, saying nothing. Merrick clapped him on the back a little too hard. "Hey, you should be proud, Uncle Orville. Not everyone gets to sit in the gallery and watch the big players at work today. You're lucky just to have a seat at the table." I clenched my fists at my sides, feeling the familiar burn rise in my chest. It wasn't the first time. My whole life had been one long exercise in being sidelined, my achievements overlooked, my voice unheard. But today, I reminded myself, today was going to be different. We moved into the main room, the lawyer at the front, the family seating themselves on the plush chairs set in a semicircle. I took my place quietly, slipping into the last row beside my parents. The conversations continued, weaving around us like we weren't even there. Someone popped open a bottle of champagne early. "Might as well celebrate," I heard Cressida murmur to Merrick, her hand brushing back her perfect blonde hair. "We already know who's taking what." I let a small smile touch my lips. They didn't know, not yet. The lawyer, a serious man named Garson, stepped forward and cleared his throat, holding up a hand for silence. The room gradually quieted, the clinking glasses stilling, the whispers dying down. "All right, everyone," Garson began, his voice steady, practiced. "Thank you for being here. As you know, we are gathered today to read the last will and testament of Alaric Sr." The weight in the room shifted slightly. I felt it, like the air had thickened, and for once, it wasn't just pressing down on me. I glanced sideways at my father, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes darting nervously toward the front. My mother's hands were folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale. "And me?" I sat up a little straighter. I had been dismissed, ignored, and underestimated my entire life. But I knew something they didn't. Something that was about to hit them harder than they could imagine. As Garson opened the leather folder and began unfolding the papers, I took a deep breath, the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of my mouth. Let them have their moment, I thought. Let them savor these last few minutes, because soon, everything was about to change. As Garson straightened the papers and cleared his throat, the room hushed in a way that felt almost unnatural. My pulse steadied, my shoulders pulled back slightly. I wasn't going to cower. Not now, not after everything. I could sense Merrick shifting in his seat, tapping a finger against his knee, his lips curving into that self-assured smirk he always wore when he was calculating numbers in his head. I knew that look well. He'd already decided what slice of the pie he'd get. Next to him, Cressida leaned toward Aunt Eloise, whispering just loud enough for the words to dance through the air. Let's see if the underdogs crawl out of this empty-handed. Her laugh, sharp as a slap, followed. I didn't flinch. I let the words hang there, collecting around me like fog, but I didn't let them settle under my skin. Not this time. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father lean closer, his voice a soft murmur in my ear. Don't hope too much, sweetheart, he said, his tone sad but resigned. We've always been outside the circle. For a second, the familiar ache tugged at me. But then, something else, something steadier, welled up. It wasn't greed or entitlement. It was knowing my own worth, even when they never had. I gave him a faint smile, but said nothing. My mother sat rigid on my other side, her gaze fixed forward, her hands still clasped tightly in her lap like she was bracing for impact. Merrick let out a little laugh and spoke just loud enough. Some of us worked for our place here, you know, he said, as though the room hadn't already filled with tension. Others, well, they're just here for the show. A ripple of laughter passed through the cousins and their parents, echoing slightly in the vaulted ceiling. My hands gripped the edge of my chair, my knuckles pale, not out of fear or anger, but out of sheer, deliberate restraint. I wasn't going to give them a show, not the one they expected anyway. It's funny, I thought, how when you're pushed to the edges long enough, you start inventing reasons to cushion the sting. Maybe they just forgot me. Maybe I'm not meant to shine here. You make excuses to survive the constant small cuts. But today, I wasn't inventing stories. I was watching theirs unravel. Garson continued reading through the formalities, his voice even, almost indifferent, like he had done this 1,000 times. Names, documents, a lifetime of legal lines folding and unfolding in his hands. But my focus wasn't on the paper or the lawyer's voice. It was on my parents, their quiet dignity, the way they had carried themselves for years despite being pushed aside, laughed at, treated like they were ornamental instead of essential. I realized with a jolt that this wasn't just about me. It was about them too. It was about reclaiming space, not just for myself, but for the family line they'd been told didn't matter. Garson's voice paused, his eyes flicking up over his glasses. Before we proceed, he announced, Mr. Alaric left specific instructions. There is a video he requested be played before the formal reading. The room shifted. It was subtle, but I could feel it. Cressida's shoulders tensed. Merrick leaned forward slightly. A cousin near the back straightened in her chair. A video? That wasn't part of the script they had been running in their minds. I sat up, feeling the rise of my heartbeat, but I kept my face calm. Garson gestured toward the assistant, who dimmed the lights. The room grew darker, shadows stretching along the walls as the projector flickered to life. I glanced around, watching the faces that had spent so many years dismissing me. They all leaned forward, their attention captured. They had no idea what was coming. The low hum of the projector filled the room, and I shifted slightly in my seat, keeping my posture straight, even as tension coiled around us. On the screen, the familiar face of Eduardo Alaric appeared, his sharp eyes almost piercing through the faded glow, the lines on his face deeper than I remembered. He looked smaller, frailer, but his voice carried the same weight it always had. "Good afternoon, everyone," my grandfather began, his tone formal, practiced. "If you're watching this, I'm no longer here to look you in the eye, but make no mistake, I see you." The room quieted so completely, I could hear the faint tick of someone's watch, a few chairs over. Merrick stopped fidgeting. Cressida pressed her lips together, glancing quickly at her mother. Aunt Eloise shifted uncomfortably in her seat, casting sidelong glances at the others. "I won't waste time on niceties," Eduardo continued, his gaze unwavering even on screen. "You're here because you expect something. You always have." I felt the corners of my mouth tighten, just slightly. Oh, they expected plenty. Then he leaned in, the camera capturing the slight narrowing of his eyes. "Can any of you name the person who visited me the most these last 6 months?" There it was. A ripple moved through the room. Merrick's jaw tensed. I caught the slight downturn of Cressida's mouth as she flicked her eyes away, as if pretending she hadn't heard. A cousin near the window shifted in his chair, the wood creaking under him. Of course they couldn't answer. None of them had come. I stayed still, my hands relaxed in my lap. It wasn't pride I felt. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something quieter, something deeper. I thought back to those evenings after work, when I'd drive over without announcement, just to sit with him in his study. I'd bring him his favorite lemon cookies, listen to his stories, not because I wanted favor, but because he had asked, and because I understood, in a way the others never did, what it felt like to be overlooked. He had been lonely, and I refused to let anyone, even Eduardo Alaric, sit in that kind of silence. As the room sat frozen, murmurs slowly began to bubble up. I caught snippets. Why would that matter? Surely not. He wouldn't base decisions on that. Cressida let out a quiet scoff, shaking her head. "This is ridiculous," she whispered, not quite softly enough. "Sentimentality over strategy. Typical old man nonsense." I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Garson raised a hand gently, his voice cutting through the whispers. "Please, everyone, Mr. Alaric asked that you hear this fully before any other business." Silence rolled back over the room like a heavy blanket. Eduardo's image returned to the center of attention, his shoulders shifting slightly as he settled deeper into his chair on screen. "I know many of you expect this to follow tradition," he said, his lips pressing into a thin line. "But understand this. My decision may surprise you. I chose based on heart, not bloodline." A pulse thudded in my chest, and for a moment, the sounds in the room blurred, like a distant echo. I took in the sea of faces, the people who had dismissed me, minimized me, ignored me. Their postures tightened, eyes darting, breath held. And then the screen went black. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. I sat still, willing my breathing to stay steady, even as my pulse raced faster. I knew this was the moment, but knowing didn't make it any less seismic. I felt my mother's hand brush against mine briefly, trembling. My father inhaled sharply, then let it out in a slow, measured sigh. I barely had time to exhale before Garson reached for the next envelope, his fingers sliding under the seal with practiced care. His voice, when it came, was gentle but firm. "We will now proceed to the reading." The room seemed to inhale collectively, the sound thick and tight. They had no idea what was about to land. As Garson's fingers broke the wax seal on the next envelope, I could hear the faint rustle of silk and cotton as bodies leaned forward, breaths caught just under the surface. The dim light from the chandelier above gave the room a strange, flickering glow, making shadows dance across the faces of my relatives. I stared straight ahead, keeping my shoulders square, my hands still clasped in my lap. My parents sat frozen on either side of me, their silence louder than any words. Garson adjusted his glasses, the lenses catching a brief gleam. His voice carried, even though he spoke calmly, "By the last will and testament of Eduardo Alaric, the following provisions are to be honored." A hush fell like a heavy curtain. Even the restless tapping of Cressida's manicured fingers against the polished wood stopped. Garson's eyes moved steadily across the paper. 51% controlling ownership of Alaric Industries. A tiny gasp escaped somewhere behind me. I didn't look back. All personal properties, including the Atlanta mansion, the Naples estate, and the lakeside retreat in Vermont. I saw Merrick's lips press into a thin, pale line, his lawyer's mind already calculating losses. And the Alaric family fund, valued at approximately $37 million. A sharp, audible breath pulled from the left side of the room. Are hereby bequeathed to Ivania Rose Alaric. There was no sound at first. Not really. Just a thick, charged pause. Then, like a dam breaking, the room erupted. What? Cressida's voice sliced through the air, her usual polished tone cracking with disbelief. That's insane! Merrick shot to his feet, papers in hand, pointing sharply at Garson. I want to see it, right now. Alaric, the eldest uncle, slammed a palm on the table. This is an outrage. Eduardo was never in his right mind toward the end. I stayed seated. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but outwardly, I remained still. I felt my father's hand tremble slightly on the armrest, his fingers curling under the wood. My mother, usually the first to soothe or hush, had gone pale, her lips parted but voiceless. I let myself take one slow breath, then another. I hadn't expected this. I had known, suspected, that the video hinted at something, maybe a gesture, maybe a symbolic piece of land or a token heirloom. But this? All of it? The voices around me grew louder, sharper, overlapping in waves of accusation and disbelief. She doesn't even know how to run a company. She wasn't even part of the board discussions. This is theft, plain and simple. Cressida stormed forward, heels clicking like a war drum on the hardwood. She slapped a manicured hand on the table before Garson. I demand to see the paperwork. There must be some mistake. Garson, to his credit, didn't flinch. He simply raised a hand slightly, his tone steady. Everything will be made available for review, Miss Cressida. But I assure you, there is no error. Merrick let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You realize we can contest this, right? None of this is set in stone. I finally turned my head, meeting his gaze without flinching. You can try, I said quietly, but maybe you should hear everything before you decide how far you want to push. He stared at me for a second longer than necessary, eyes narrowing, before scoffing and sinking back into his seat. The swirl of angry voices filled the room again, but I kept my attention inward. I thought about the nights I had driven out here after long shifts, the way Grandpa Eduardo would light up when I arrived, the quiet companionship we shared that none of these people ever bothered to notice. I hadn't done it for this moment, but now that it was here, I wasn't about to apologize for it. I stole a glance at my parents. Orville was staring blankly at the table, his mouth slightly open, as if still trying to process the words. Lurlene's hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. They weren't angry. They were scared. And that, more than anything, made something harden inside me. I wasn't just standing for myself now. Garson's voice, sharper this time, cut through the chaos. Ladies and gentlemen, please. There are still conditions and instructions Mr. Alaric wished me to read. The room froze, the sudden halt making my ears ring. Slowly, carefully, Garson reached for the next envelope, lifting it with deliberate care. I sat up a little taller, feeling the shift not just around me, but within me. The anger around me was thick, almost suffocating. But for the first time, I felt something else rising too. The anger inside me. Garson's hand hovered above the envelope, as if the paper itself radiated tension. I leaned forward slightly, not out of eagerness, but because I sensed the tremor rippling through the room. A shift was coming, and every muscle in my body tensed in silent preparation. The murmurs had died down, but they hadn't disappeared. I caught Alaric's muttered, "This is absurd," under his breath. Cressida's arms were crossed so tightly over her chest, I wondered if she was cutting off her own circulation. Merrick, the consummate strategist, had gone quiet, his eyes flicking back and forth like a chess player plotting an emergency move. Garson cleared his throat, a small but commanding sound. As per Mr. Eduardo Alaric's instructions, the inheritance has been structured with protective clauses. It cannot be overridden or reassigned outside of specific conditions outlined here. I felt the heat of Merrick's glare even before I turned. "There's no such thing as airtight, sweetheart," he hissed softly in my direction. "Every will can be contested." Garson, unfazed, raised a hand calmly. "While, yes, legal challenges are a possibility, please understand, this particular arrangement is designed to be nearly impervious. Contesting it would require a court battle projected to last, at minimum, 8 to 10 years, with little to no chance of success, and at enormous cost." That landed. The room pulsed with a new wave of frustration. Cressida's polished smile cracked into a sharp line. "He wouldn't have done that," she muttered sharply, to no one in particular. "Not to the family." Merrick stood abruptly, pulling Alaric aside. Their whispers weren't exactly discreet. I watched Alaric's hand slice the air in a harsh, chopping motion as Merrick leaned in, gesturing urgently. Their words didn't reach me, but their body language spoke loud enough. They were scrambling, desperately. And right then, in the middle of the circling tension, I realized something. This wasn't just about wealth. It wasn't even about resentment. For them, this was about dominance. Control they'd long assumed belonged to them, now slipping through their fingers like sand. I stood up. Not dramatically, not to make a scene, but purposefully. My chair barely made a sound as I rose, and somehow, that silence was more arresting than if I had slammed my hands on the table. "I know," I said evenly. "Some of you are already planning how to tear this apart." My voice was steady, the same tone I used when mediating workplace conflicts, when I didn't have the luxury of shouting or storming out. "I'm not here to fight with you. I'm not here to gloat either." They stared, blinking, taken aback that I was speaking at all. For years, I had been the quiet one, the youngest daughter, the overlooked niece, the girl who no one thought needed a voice. "But understand this," I continued, sweeping my eyes slowly across the room. "What's been entrusted to me, I will protect. You may not think I'm capable. You may not think I deserve it. But don't mistake silence for weakness." The room fell into an uneasy hush. I could feel the weight of their surprise, the momentary recalibration as they saw me. Really saw me, perhaps for the first time. Cressida let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You think you can stand up to us?" she sneered, her voice rich with amusement and venom. "Sweetheart, you're not built for this game." Merrick, cool and calculated, narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. "She's bluffing," he murmured, more to Alaric than anyone else. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. My gaze drifted, almost unconsciously, to my parents. For a heartbeat, I saw their expressions shift. Pride, flickering behind the shock, behind the years of resigned acceptance. Let them underestimate me, I thought. Let them assume. Garson's voice rose again, a quiet authority cutting through the tightening storm. "We're not finished." He laid a final document on the table, his hands steady as he positioned it precisely in the center. "This," he said carefully, "is not about inheritance. There is one more matter Mr. Alaric wished to be addressed. One final instruction." I felt my pulse kick, a deep, thrumming undercurrent in my chest. Cressida leaned forward, her eyes sharp and predatory. "What the hell else is there?" she muttered under her breath. Merrick adjusted his cufflink, a twitch of agitation. "Probably some symbolic gesture," he murmured dismissively. But I knew better. I didn't know what was inside that envelope, not exactly, but I could feel it. I could feel the way the air had shifted, the way the attention in the room had sharpened, the way every single person had stilled. Garson's hand hovered, fingers just brushing the seal. And in that suspended moment, I realized, whatever was inside that envelope, it wasn't going to calm the room. It was going to ignite the next war. As Garson slid the USB drive into the laptop, I felt the air thicken around us, a heavy, invisible weight pressing on every shoulder in the room. There was a slight mechanical whir as the projector adjusted focus, and then the screen lit up with a shaky but unmistakable image. Eduardo Alaric, my grandfather, seated in his familiar high-backed leather chair, looking thin but unyielding. A hushed murmur ran through the room. Alaric, standing a few feet away, narrowed his eyes, and Cressida let out a faint, sharp exhale. I remained still, my fingers laced in my lap, waiting. Eduardo's voice emerged, raspier than I remembered, but steady. "If you're watching this, I'm no longer with you," he began. "And I imagine some of you are angry, perhaps not surprised. But let me be clear. These decisions weren't about favoritism or loyalty to old names. They were about integrity." The room tensed. The video shifted. Eduardo gestured to someone off camera, and suddenly, on screen, snippets played. Alaric dismissing longtime staff who'd served the family for decades, casually waving off their pleas. Another clip, Cressida, stern-faced, arguing with company managers, slashing employee benefits while laughing over cocktails. Then Merrick, speaking with a contractor, twisting clauses to extract personal gain. I watched as the people who had long held the reins twitched and bristled in their seats, their reputations cracking under the cold light of recorded truth. Alaric let out a sharp, "This is edited," only to be cut off by Eduardo's voice. "Some of you will claim this was taken out of context, but context is built over years, not minutes." Merrick clenched his jaw, his carefully controlled face slipping for just a second. I caught the flicker in his eyes, not of guilt, but calculation. He was already thinking of a counterattack. Then, unexpectedly, a soft voice spoke up from the back. It was Doretha, the family housekeeper, who had stood quietly by the side, blending into the wallpaper like she always did. She stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes lowered respectfully but firm. "I was asked to speak today," she said gently. "Not to take sides, but to share what I've witnessed over the years." All eyes turned to her. Doretha looked over at me, a faint smile touching her lips before she straightened. "Ivania," she said softly, "was offered early inheritance twice. She refused. She said she just wanted her grandfather to get better. She never asked for anything, never angled, never schemed." There was a ripple in the room, an uncomfortable, fidgeting wave. Cressida scoffed quietly, rolling her eyes, but even she didn't have the boldness to speak aloud right then. I rose slowly, steadying myself with one hand on the back of the chair. My heart beat hard against my ribs, but I drew in a deep breath and let my gaze sweep over the crowd. "I know some of you are angry," I said calmly. "You see this as a challenge, but I'm not here to tear anyone down. I'm here to hold the line my grandfather drew. You can't rewrite that line just because you don't like it." Cressida let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. You think you're the new center of this family? Please." Merrick stepped forward, smoothing his tie with a cold smile. "Careful, Ivania. You're stepping onto a field you don't understand." I held his gaze without blinking. "You underestimate me," I said softly, "and that's been your mistake all along." Alaric leaned forward slightly, his eyes dark and sharp. "You really think you can stand against all of us, little girl?" His voice was low, almost soft, but it carried a razor's edge. I felt a flicker of heat rise inside me. Not anger, not quite. Resolve. "I'm not alone," I replied evenly, "and you know it." There was a moment, a breathless pause, as the weight of those words settled in the room, and then, just at the edge of my hearing, I caught it. The faint buzz of engines outside, the soft crackle of radios, the unmistakable murmuring of media voices. Cressida frowned, glancing sharply toward the windows. Zephyr, one of the younger cousins, pulled out his phone, eyes wide as he tapped rapidly on the screen. "We're trending," he murmured, half to himself, half to everyone. "Oh, this is going to blow up." I straightened my shoulders, feeling the storm coiling just beyond the walls of the mansion. Let them watch, I thought. Let the world see what happens next. Garson cleared his throat, gently placing another envelope on the polished table. "There's one final matter," he said quietly, but the words sliced through the tension like a blade. "Something Mr. Alaric wanted you all to hear." My pulse surged, and I took a slow breath. As the first flashes of camera lights began to blink through the tall windows, I lifted my chin. "Ready?" The air inside the mansion seemed to hum with a strange static, as though the walls themselves sensed the tension coiling tighter with every second. Garson's fingers carefully slipped under the envelope's flap, but before the seal fully tore, a shrill ping broke the moment. Zephyr's phone, held just below his chest, buzzed and glowed. His face lit up, eyes wide with half-shocked, half-thrilled energy. I watched as his thumbs moved quickly, tapping, swiping, sending. He wasn't trying to hide it anymore. I saw the look pass between Cressida and Merrick, the quick flicker of alarm when they realized this wasn't just a family affair anymore. It was public. Outside the tall windows, beyond the heavy drapes, flashes sparked. First one, then a dozen, then more. Reporters gathered, cameras hoisted on shoulders, long microphones raised above heads. Their muffled shouts filtered through the glass like a rising wave. Inside, Cressida stepped forward, her heels sharp on the polished floor. "This is disgusting," she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You knew this would happen, didn't you? You wanted this spectacle." I met her glare evenly. "No, Cressida," I said quietly, voice low but clear. "You all made this spectacle the moment you forgot what this family was supposed to stand for." Her lips parted in shock, but before she could speak, Merrick cut in. "You think this little inheritance play gives you leverage? Think again, Ivania. I've got a team of lawyers lined up to shred this in court. You won't even see the subpoenas coming." I let his words hang in the air, watched as Alaric crossed his arms, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the floor. "Don't be naive, girl," he said, voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You might have signatures on paper, but power? Influence? That doesn't shift overnight." I took a breath, steady and slow, letting it fill the quiet space between us. "Maybe not overnight," I murmured, "but you're wrong if you think I'm standing here alone." For a moment, the room paused. Even the angry whispers hushed slightly as I stepped forward. Zephyr, half in disbelief, tilted his phone, the live stream catching my face as I turned toward the camera. "Let them see," I said softly, directing my words not to the family, but to whoever was watching on the other side of the screen. "Let them see what truth looks like." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Cressida snorted, shaking her head. "This is pathetic," she sneered. "She's playing for the crowd." Merrick leaned over, whispering something sharp to Alaric, whose jaw tightened. The old lion's eyes locked on me. "Careful, Ivania," Alaric murmured, stepping just close enough for me to feel the weight of his presence. "You may think you've won something today, but you have no idea what you've started." I didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I've started," I replied, voice level. "What you can't stand is that I'm not backing down." Behind me, Doretha moved quietly to my side, her expression gentle but firm. Garson stood, holding the final document carefully, his voice cutting through the tension. "There is still more," he said, and Mr. Alaric wanted everyone to understand. "This isn't just about assets, it's about accountability." The word hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar in this room. Outside, the media chatter swelled, the flashing lights reflecting off the glass like little stars bursting against the night. Inside, the Alarics huddled closer, their confidence faltering just slightly under the scrutiny they had never expected. Zephyr's phone buzzed again. He let out a soft laugh, shaking his head. Oh man, people are eating this up. They're calling it the Alaric meltdown. Cressida rounded on him, face flushed with anger. Put that down, you idiot! You're making it worse! Zephyr just grinned, backing away a step. Too late, cousin. It's already out there. Alaric's eyes snapped to me, cold and hard. This isn't over, he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. I held his gaze, and for the first time in my life, felt no tremor inside. No, I said softly, a small, steady smile curling at the edge of my lips. It's just beginning. The murmur of the crowd outside reached a peak as more vehicles pulled up, more cameras turned, more faces peered in through the gates. Inside, the atmosphere bristled with a charged silence, the kind that settles right before lightning strikes. Garson lifted the last folder, his voice composed but heavy with meaning. Shall we continue? I squared my shoulders, feeling the weight of generations pressing down and the sharp thrill of breaking free from it. As the boardroom doors loomed in my sightline, I realized the true battle, the one that mattered, wasn't about money or legacy. It was about standing my ground. And I was ready. As Garson's fingers pressed the folder open, I followed him out of the main hall and down the corridor toward the boardroom. My parents moved beside me, quiet, unsure, but their presence was grounding. Behind us, the noise in the mansion grew as family voices clashed with the shouting press outside, Zephyr's live stream feeding it all into the world. The walk down that polished corridor felt longer than it was, each footstep echoing in the thick air. At the door, Garson gave me a brief glance. No words passed between us, but the meaning was clear. This was the room where the final blows would land. I squared my shoulders, nodded once, and pushed the doors open. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with quiet tension. The long table gleamed under the chandelier, the chairs filled with company executives, a few trusted advisors, and of course, Merrick, Cressida, and Alaric seated together, their expressions a mix of disdain and calculation. Garson took his place at the head of the room, clearing his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, per Mr. Alaric's directives, we are here to finalize the inheritance structure and address any outstanding challenges. Merrick immediately rose, waving a thick folder. We're contesting it all, he said flatly. Every clause. There are inconsistencies, potential coercion, and frankly, favoritism that deserves judicial review. Garson remained unfazed. The will has been legally validated by multiple independent attorneys. As you know, Mr. Alaric anticipated challenges and incorporated airtight clauses that prevent frivolous contests. He laid out a set of documents. Proceed if you wish, Mr. Merrick, but understand, the court battles will cost millions, and the chance of success is negligible. The room shifted, subtle but noticeable. Merrick's confident smirk twitched slightly, though he quickly masked it. Alaric leaned forward, voice low. We'll rally the investors. They won't follow a girl with no experience. I rose then, feeling the familiar rise of adrenaline, but I held it steady. They'll follow integrity, Uncle, I said, my voice cutting clean through the heavy air. What they won't follow is a man willing to burn down his own company because his pride was wounded. Cressida scoffed, arms crossed. Please, you think you can stand here and lecture us? You're nothing but Eduardo's pet project. I stepped to the front of the room, meeting her gaze evenly. You're right. I was never part of your club. I didn't drink at your parties, didn't play the power games, didn't step on people just to get ahead. But here I am, and you know why? I glanced around at the board members, their faces attentive, watching. Because when I sat beside Eduardo in his last months, I listened. I saw what mattered to him. This isn't just about money. It's about the legacy of a man who built this from nothing, who gave people jobs, security, dignity. A murmur moved through the room. One of the board members, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. Alaric's fist slammed the table, making several people jump. Enough, he barked. I'll take my investors elsewhere. Let's see how long you last when the capital dries up. My heart pounded, but I stood firm. You're free to leave, Alaric, but you walk away with nothing but your pride. My words were soft, but they landed hard. Eduardo protected this company from the inside out. The board knows it, the legal team knows it, and the public's watching. You can throw your tantrum, but you can't rewrite the truth. The room fell silent. Garson cleared his throat again, drawing attention back to the table. We will now take the final vote of confidence. The boardroom doors closed softly as the vote commenced. One by one, hands rose, some hesitant, some firm. But they rose. When the final tally came in, Garson looked up, his expression composed. By board decision, Ivania Alaric retains control of the company. The succession plan stands. Outside, the reporters surged forward as the news spread like wildfire. The silent daughter, they called me, the one no one counted on. And now, the one who'd just toppled the old guard. Inside, Alaric stood, his face pale with rage. Without a word, he turned and stalked out, Merrick following with sharp, clipped footsteps. Cressida lingered, her mouth opening as if to speak, but then she simply shook her head and stormed after them. For a moment, the room remained suspended, the air thick with the aftermath of battle. Slowly, I stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against my skin. The mansion's great lawn stretched out under a sky streaked with the last fading light. My parents joined me, standing quietly at my side. They didn't say anything, but their presence spoke enough. I let out a long breath, the kind that pulls from deep in your chest, feeling the tension unwind just slightly. We survived the storm, I whispered, mostly to myself. My mother's hand brushed lightly against mine, her fingers trembling just a bit. My father's eyes glistened faintly, though he blinked quickly, looking away. But I knew, we all knew, the scars, they were still ours to carry. And this was just the beginning. As the last of the reporters drifted away, their camera lights blinking out one by one, the grounds of the Alaric mansion settled into an eerie hush. I remained on the steps, watching the taillights fade into the night, the sound of gravel crunching beneath tires, receding until it was just us. Me, my parents, the few household staff gathering the leftover glasses and tidying the aftermath. I wrapped my arms around myself, not because I was cold, but because, for the first time all day, the weight of everything caught up to me. My mother, Lurleen, shifted beside me, her arm brushing mine, a subtle comfort. My father, Orville, gave a small sigh, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the darkened driveway. None of us said anything, and yet everything was understood. We turned back toward the house together, moving slowly, the kind of tiredness that seeps into your bones, not from physical strain, but from emotional battle. As we stepped into the foyer, the quiet clink of dishes in the kitchen drifted faintly through the air. Doretha, the longtime housekeeper, emerged, wiping her hands on a towel. "You did good, honey," she said softly, her voice carrying a kind of warmth that cut through the chill in my chest. She stepped forward, gathering me briefly into a hug, the kind you didn't know you needed until it was there. He knew. Mr. Eduardo knew you were the right one. I felt the sting at the back of my eyes, but blinked it away quickly, offering a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Doretha. Really?" She gave me a knowing look, her gaze gentle but sharp. "You'll need strength, baby. Winning the fight's one thing, living with it's another." Those words stayed with me as we moved toward the dining room. We didn't light candles or open champagne or lay out a feast. My parents and I sat at the long table, just the three of us, with simple bowls of stew Doretha had kept warm, fresh bread, and glasses of water. It was quiet. Almost too quiet, like the silence was pressing in on all sides. I stirred my spoon absently, looking at my parents. My father met my gaze, clearing his throat softly. "We never imagined it would end like this." "I know," I said, my voice even. Neither did I. My mother placed her spoon down gently, her expression thoughtful. We were proud of you today, Ivania. The words hit harder than I expected. I gave a small, almost awkward smile. Thanks, Mom. We sat there for a while, eating in slow bites, the clock on the wall ticking steadily in the background. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, their branches scratching faintly against the window. I found myself thinking not about victory or power, or what came next in the company, but about the sheer emotional exhaustion that settled like a second skin. After the meal, I stepped away for a moment, walking back out to the front porch. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the lawn. My chest felt tight, not with anxiety, but with the realization that this was real. It was over. And yet, it wasn't. The public fight was done. But the private one, the one inside my heart, that was just beginning. I heard the door creak behind me, and my mother's footsteps approached. She stood beside me quietly, looking up at the same moon. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she asked softly, not looking directly at me. I drew a deep breath, feeling it settle in my ribs. "I think we'll make it through." We stayed there for a few more minutes, just standing together, not filling the silence with unnecessary words. Eventually, she touched my arm lightly. "Come inside, Ivania. You need rest." I nodded, following her back inside. Later that night, as I lay in the guest bedroom, the events of the day played on repeat in my mind. The anger in Alaric's eyes, Cressida's sharp tongue, Merrick's legal posturing, all of it. But more than that, I felt the ache of knowing some relationships had been shattered beyond repair. And maybe they always had been. Maybe I was only just now seeing it clearly. I turned on my side, staring out the window at the pale moonlight streaking across the floor. We survived the storm, but healing, that's another kind of fight. I closed my eyes, feeling the heaviness in my chest, and wondered if peace would ever feel real. Before we bring this video to a close, let me share something personal, something I've learned from every step of this journey. I stood in rooms where I was invisible. I sat at tables where my voice didn't matter. I watched people who claimed to love me show their true colors when power and money were at stake. But here's the truth. Surviving that storm didn't make me bitter. It made me stronger. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Your worth isn't measured by who approves of you or what they say you deserve. It's measured by how you carry yourself when the world underestimates you, and by how you choose to rise anyway. To anyone watching who's ever been pushed aside, belittled, or told you're not enough, I want you to hear me loud and clear. You are enough. You've always been enough. And when the day comes that you finally stand your ground, don't be surprised if the very people who doubted you are the ones who collapse under the weight of their own choices. Now I'm curious, have you ever faced a moment where you had to stand up for yourself, even when everyone expected you to stay silent? What helped you push through? Or maybe you're still holding back, waiting for the right moment. What's holding you back today? Drop a comment below. If this video touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like the video, that's okay too. Let me know why, and share where you're tuning in from. If you want to hear more real-life stories that challenge, inspire, and connect us, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join this growing community. Your voice matters here, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next story.